Thank you so much for the SKYSCRAPER Museum for hosting us. Welcome to Timber Matters, Regional Approaches to Sustainable Mass Timber. I'm Lindsay Wickstrom, and I'll be moderating our panel today. We have 5 amazing panelists. Today's event is produced by Mass Timber at NSU and by Colorado Mass Timber Coalition, so already regional multidisciplinary collaboration, and sponsored by National Forest Foundation. So please make sure to remain after the talk and take advantage of the refreshments and it's behind me. So I'm the author of this book called Designing the Forest and Other Mass Timber Futures. And I think that's why I've been invited to moderate, because I'm really passionate about the future of mass timber, and I was really skeptical about the future of mass timber. It's very trendy, like you mentioned, Danielle, it has a very short history, it has a lot of potential, and we're here to write that history and to see what's possible going forward. One of the many topics in the book that I wanted to highlight in my introduction today, as we head into this amazing discussion, is the importance of the relationship between a strong timber market and forest resiliency. One of the questions that comes up over and over again when I have discussions like this of this nature at groups large and small is, are there enough trees in the world, and is this the right thing to do for our forests? Will it cause depletion? And one of the counterintuitive things that I've learned in my research and over the years having amazing conversations with individuals like this amazing panel here is learning how investing in a forest and creating marketable products from a particular species in a region actually puts money into that forest. It keeps it a forest rather than allowing it to be depleted by agricultural development or urban development. And what this does is keep the forest resilient. The more people that care actively about a place, the more it becomes resilient to pests, wildfires, and other sorts of extreme climate weather. A poor forest doesn't have the same kind of ability to battle those types of issues. So here we have the importance of regional approaches, because every area that mass timber products grow, or trees and forests, grow differently. One tree growing on one side of the hill versus another side has a different character. And so what is required to gather all of this value, this biomass, and valorize it is an entire supply chain of innovative thinkers, from the cultivation of saplings and forest design to harvesting mechanics, designing of roads for the harvesting, all the way through manufacturing of product, specification of product, where I really am interested and passionate about how architects engage with this active role. We call it climate action from the behind the desk, all the way through end of life design. So how does the timber end up possibly back as fertilizer in the earth? Can we complete the cycle? So today, without further ado, I wanted to introduce our panelists very briefly, and then I'll let them say more about themselves. We're honored to have folks from across the country here to give you a sampling of everything that's going on in the US. And not to put too much on your shoulders, but I believe that we've assembled the perfect panel. So we have Marcus Kaufman from Oregon, so the Pacific Northwest, and his amazing work out there. We have from the Rockies, Will Lepre from the National Forest Foundation, Director of Colorado's Mass Timber Coalition. Sandra Lupian, the Director of Mass Timber at NSU, so Midwest section, and the state of Michigan as a whole. Catherine Pfeifenberger, Head of Development and Construction at Jamestown, the leading developer on the Ponce City Market in Atlanta, Georgia. And then finally, our very own New York Schism, Karagos, who is part of the Economic Development Corporation, part of the Mass Timber Studio, which just had an amazing event this morning. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Marcus, and I hope you enjoy the panel, and then after we're done with the presentations, we'll be in discussion and we'll invite you to add your comments and questions. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the introduction. My name is Marcus Kaufman with the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm going to just kind of kick us off talking about our particular approach with the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition. And, you know, I've been working in forestry and economic development and natural resource management for 25 years. So I look at these questions from perspective of how can we do both really good natural resource stewardship and grow sustainable, equitable economic development. And, you know, kind of the question of how do we start, why do we need a coalition in a place like Oregon that is one of the thought leaders, that we enjoy the first mover advantage in the world of mass timber? Why do we even need a coalition? This is the question that is then put to me. And the reason is we're trying to go further. We're trying to go faster. We're trying to innovate. We're trying to take the opportunity that mass timber presents and stretch it into forest resilience, stretch it into good jobs, stretch it into affordable housing. And not just the beautiful one-off white uniform buildings that are kind of the hallmark of what we do now. And I love those white uniform buildings. And you know, here's a perfect example of one. So this is the new Portland Airport. 2.5 million more feet of Doug fir, all from within 300 miles of our region. So this is a catalyst project. This puts one of the state's biggest economic development organizations, the Port of Portland, into the game. The game figuring out how we can use mass timber as an economic development driver, as a driver for affordable housing. And where we started with the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition in 2020 was really people coming to us after the disastrous year of over 1,000 homes burned and 1 million acres from forest fires, and asking the question, can mass timber do more? Can mass timber be a source of replacement housing for those who lost their homes in wildfires? Can mass timber be a way to drive market demand that fosters resilience of our forests and our federal forests? And can we do more? And that's really the driving kind of genesis of the Oregon Mass Timber Coalition. And you can see all the names there on the list, but essentially it's a combination of state agencies and our R1 research universities, Oregon State and University of Oregon, that work together with through the Tall Design Institute, the State's Economic Development Agency, Business Oregon, us at Oregon Department of Forestry, the State Forestry Organization, and then Department of Land Conservation and Development for the code aspects of it. And all those pieces are important because if we're trying to go from beautiful one-off buildings and we have an established supply chain, we're trying to go into housing. And we're trying to particularly look into modular housing and flat pack housing. So modular, those things represent risk, right? And risk and de-risking the private sector's participation in the supply chain is the reason why these coalitions exist. And they're all going to be in different forms and flavors, and my colleagues up here on the panel are going to give you their particular aspects of what is needed. And we organize around very simple principles of what do our private sector partners need. And so we were lucky enough to be awarded $41.4 million through the USEDA, Economic Development Administration, Department of Commerce. And then we organized that into a series of projects. So I'll give you just a quick flavor of each of those projects, very super high level. So we have a very strong workforce component, and we have a site development project at Port of Portland's Terminal 2, which is an old marine terminal. So this is the place where we're essentially trying to build a mass timber campus. And it will be anchored by the Oregon Acoustic Research Facility run by University of Oregon, and we hope a modular mass timber facility. And that's been a multi-year project, multi-millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that are required to make that whole project happen. And then our workforce strategy is essentially responding to the upskilling needs of people in forestry, construction, and advanced manufacturing. And we're not foolish enough to take this all on by ourselves. We're running this through Portland Community College, Work Systems, which is kind of the workforce investment board for the Portland metro area, Glacier Peak Institute, which is a small nonprofit up in Washington. So we have delivery partners that really understand the pedagogy and how to work with folks in the trades. And then we have a research and design and prototype effort through University of Oregon. So getting into housing, what does that look like? So Judith Shine and Mark Kretz from Vivo designed this lovely little 2-story mass plywood building, 760 square feet, all out of mass plywood, built in Oregon, manufactured in Oregon. There's an interior shot that I took of what it would look like furnished. And essentially that's kind of the beginning of the prototyping phase. Try some stuff, test it out, learn from it. Our kind of mantra is test, validate, scale. So we're in the testing phase. The testing is expensive and time consuming, but it needs to happen because then we can get real reactions from people about what it'd be like to live in a 760 square foot mass plywood house. So we are also building our research facilities so that we can again be a better partner for innovation. Innovation and experimentation, all that iterative process is too expensive if you have to send a mass plywood panel halfway across the country to have its properties tested. So fire testing, acoustic testing, those are both new facilities that we're building in Oregon, both at U of O and OSU. And then my particular project is addressing the fiber supply challenges. And again, you may think that there wouldn't be fiber supply challenges in a state like Oregon. Oregon is the nation's leader in softwood production, one of the leaders in plywood production and engineered wood products. But in the last few years, we've had a fiber crisis due to increased conservation on our private forests, which is a good thing. And unfortunately, large and destructive wildfires, which have taken millions of acres out of production, or at least until those lands get replanted and regrown into the next forests. So there is a big challenge, particularly on federal lands, to try to get more fiber into the system and use this market-driven approach to drive better management on our federal forests. So we do that in partnership between us at State Forestry and USDA Forest Service on the Willamette National Forest, using a set of authorities called Good Neighbor Authority, which any state can use, allows us to work on federal lands. So we basically roll up our sleeves and partner up with the national forests. And then lastly, if we're going to be building modular mass timber homes, we have to ensure that the code, the land use code and the development codes in those communities, that those codes are ready to go and those communities are open for business when it comes to mass timber. So our partnership with the Department of Land Conservation and Development is really about bringing that capacity and doing that very technical code analysis in small rural communities across the state that don't have that, they just simply don't have the staff to take those code experts, drop them down into these communities, open up their code book and examine what needs to be changed so that they're ready to go to business when we drop the first of these prototypes and we have folks who are ready to build these. So where to from here? We've been very successful so far at getting a big chunk of money and making investments. We've also recently were designated a tech hub, so the Pacific Northwest Mass Timber Tech Hub expands our region of service from Oregon into Washington. And then we're also been awarded National Science Foundation Regional Engine Award through U of O. So these are like two big opportunities to chase additional dollars to continue the investment. Unfortunately, we didn't win out on the big money from the Tech Hub. We got $500,000 to kind of continue the work along. So where we're going is taking this approach, pushing it into Washington, and really trying to stay focused on providing real value to folks across the supply chain. So I'll leave it there, leave some time for Will.
Hi, everyone. My name is Will. I'm the director of the Colorado Mass Timber Coalition. So I want to start by saying how this coalition began. And in 2020, Colorado suffered its top 3 largest wildfires. And we had a local philanthropic foundation, the Gates Family Foundation, not really at all to Bill and Melinda Gates. And they saw this, and one of their pillars is natural resource investment. So they were thinking, how can we prevent these wildfires in the future? They heard about mass timber, started talking to some stakeholders in forestry, commercial building developers, started putting together this coalition of people, connecting people along the potential supply chain. They applied for some grant funding, the big one being the Wood Innovation Grant from the U.S. Forest Service, along with some other nonprofits. And then that funded the position that I took in April. So to give you an overview of our mission statement, we want to accelerate the adoption of mass timber products within the state, but really thinking about how we can use local resources to do this. In particular, using fiber from the areas that need to be treated on our forest land and making sure it's processed locally, so keeping jobs in the rural areas, potentially creating new jobs, and then using that to address our buildings and in particular affordable housing. Colorado is one of the worst housing crises in the United States. So the coalition itself, 20 executive committee members spread across the entire value chain. So foresters, again, developers, architects, everything in between. Over 225 members across 100 organizations. So we've tripled in size since April, which has been really exciting to see just the interest happening in Colorado. So we have this mission statement and all these people. How does this fit into our vision for Colorado's sustainable future? And this is just one part of Colorado's sustainable future, but really we need to start managing our forests. So managing the forest involves sometimes thinning or taking wood from the forest. And can we use that wood here locally, process it in our sawmills, potentially create new manufacturing jobs, and then taking those mass timber products and putting in the next generation of buildings and residences, not only to address our climate goals, but to also address affordable housing. And hopefully this cycle will be self-sustaining at some point, but this is really kind of our North Star goal going forward. So we have the coalition members, a lot of interest. What are we actually doing to meet this goal? So we developed these 7 subcommittees, which are essentially working groups along the potential value chain. So this is an opportunity for members to share their expertise, but also for members about areas they might not have any knowledge in. So forest resources, really understanding what's the potential fiber supply within the state, how can we get it, what's driving demand in Colorado in particular, how can we use mass timber for affordable housing, what's our actual capacity once we have the fiber and do new investments there. And then the workforce, so thinking about workers from forestry, manufacturing, and then construction. Policy is going to be a big part as well, not only the harvesting, again, through an entire value chain. And then how can we incorporate the work our universities are doing to progress mass timber with a particular focus on Colorado species or policy. So we have some challenges. I alluded to this earlier, but Colorado forests are unhealthy. They are overgrown, but mortality is outpacing growth. And this is due to disease, insects, and the uncharacteristic wildfires, which has been amplified by climate change and previous management practices for lack thereof. So over 20% of our standing timber is dead. Next part of that is we have a dwindling forest crop economy. So we used to have over 80 sawmills in the 1980s, down to 27 now. So there's no space for this fiber to go, to be processed, to support it. And those sawmills now are not at capacity at all. And then maybe the biggest challenge is the social license. So people hate wildfires when they're happening. They don't like the hazy summer, they don't like breathing in that air. But then when you say, hey, we need to cut down trees, they say, no, don't do that. I didn't come to the forest to see less trees. So it's really an educational outreach program and really shifting the mindset of what a healthy forest looks like and how we can get there based in science and practices that are well accepted. And of course, housing, which I mentioned earlier too, really figuring out how we can make affordable housing pencil using mass timber. We've had some successes though. So the state has 35 mass timber projects with 47 in design. This is one of the highest ratios in the country. And we don't have a major mass timber manufacturer, so there's tons of interest in Colorado going forward. The city of Denver is one of 2 cities, I believe, outside of Washington and Oregon that's adopted the most recent codes, which allows full exposure of the ceilings, I believe, up to 12 stories. And then a growing community. So the coalition has been growing very rapidly. We also just had the Mass Timber Group Summit, which some of you might be familiar with. Over 250 people came to that as well, very industry focused. And then growing end markets too. So not just mass timber, but biomass utilization as well. So think about the entire value chain. And then one success story I really want to highlight is Timber Age Systems, which is a small company down in Durango. And they have been using ponderosa pine from fuel mitigation work to make CLT for local durable housing. So a lot of the times, you know, when you hear about mass timber, it's too expensive, you can't use this material. So Kyle Hansen and his team were just like, we're gonna try it, we're gonna do some experiments. And the picture you see here, this is a schoolroom for the Battle Rock Charter School in Cortez, which is in the very southwest corner. And the students love it, the teachers love it. It's a super beautiful ponderosa pine building and could be a model for other small towns as well. So looking forward, growing community, gonna start having more regular events as a coalition. Really, this first couple of months have been a knowledge building exercise. You know, what do we actually have in Colorado, and how's that going to inform future investment, and then sharing that publicly. Going to the storytelling again. One of the most interesting things I've seen from my position is that a lot of the forestry conversations I have now are with architects. They want to know where their wood is coming from to tell that story. So mass timber is a way to open a whole new group of people to care about the forest, which is great. And then throw this out there, we're having our annual conference on October 30th. If you're in Fort Collins or Colorado, please come up. It'll be free, it'll be great. And then a placeholder for our website, which we're developing. And of course, I'd like to thank the sponsors, National Forest Foundation, Gates Foundation, the Wind Innovation Grant, Mighty Arrow Foundation, and Conscious Bay. So thank you.
Thanks, Will, and thanks again to the Skyscraper Museum for being such a generous host and active host of this event. We really appreciate being here. Thank you. And thanks to my fellow panelists. So I'm Sandra Lupian. I lead a program called Mass Timber at MSU at Michigan State University. I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute, but first, this is going to get interactive now, which everyone's going to be like, oh no. But is there anyone here from Michigan? Yeah, you don't get to answer this question, Sophie, and neither do I. What is Michigan shaped like? What is Michigan's shape? Okay, so then there's one peninsula that is shaped like a mitten. We call it the mitten, the lower peninsula. And the upper peninsula, I'm not even going to try, but I think it looks like a running bunny. It's like up here doing this thing. So why is it shaped like that? What defines the shape of Michigan? Lakes, the Great Lakes. So we're a state whose shape and much of our economy has historically been defined by water. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But first I'm going to tell you what we're doing. So Mass Timber at MSU. This is a collaboration in Michigan State University, which is the nation's first land-grant university, which you may not know. So it has a 3-pillar mission to do research, teaching and education, and stakeholder engagement, which we call extension. So Mass Timber at MSU is leveraging all those things, as well as thinking about policy to advance mass timber construction and manufacture in Michigan and the Great Lakes region and beyond. And we're collaboration across our Department of Forestry, our School of Planning, Design, and Construction, which actually has a construction management program, and the extension. And we work in close partnership with state agencies, especially the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. They want to see mass timber being made in Michigan using Michigan wood, and also with significant support from the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Program for several programs. And if everybody's wondering why when we say U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Program, you look there, it's because Kevin Naran puts it in there, so yay. So why in the heck is a state that's so defined by water and the shape of water so interested in a wood products economy, right? So we also have a lot of trees in Michigan. We're the 5th most heavily forested state in the country. 53% of the state is covered by trees. We know how to make stuff. We have a really strong manufacturing and engineering culture. You might have heard about we invented cars. Sometimes we're sorry, sometimes we're, that's just a very difficult cognitive dissonance to hold, but we didn't invent cars. We manufacture manufacturing equipment. We also manufacture furniture and we make forest products, right? The forest products industry in Michigan employs a lot of people and it puts out a good deal of economic output each year. As Will had said and others have indicated, right, that industry has been declining for many decades. Mass timber is seen as a way to maybe revitalize that economy in our state. And we also need to build, like every other state in the country, we have a housing deficit. We need to build 190,000 housing units. And many of those are going to be density housing, which works really well with mass timber, right? We also need to build other types of commercial buildings, manufacturing facilities, and institutional types of buildings. So a lot of strong need to build. And finally, we have a plan in Michigan to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. We call it the Michigan or the MI Healthy Climate Plan. And by the way, that plan mentions mass timber 3 times as a tool in the state's toolkit to get there. So it's already in a key policy. So the state of Michigan's already also started to invest in mass timber. We haven't been able to leverage the type of funds that Oregon has yet, but we're working on it. That's our wonderful governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and this is her signing our 2025 fiscal year budget, which does have a $1 million investment, basically for mass timber market development activities. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. The state has also invested $750,000 in our program Mass Timber at MSU starting in 2020. And that funding is to help us do all of this outreach and stakeholder engagement work that we're doing to develop markets and to develop a mass timber ecosystem in Michigan. And it's also for some specific research projects. This is a really important investment that the state made. So the Michigan DNR created a new building to house a community services facility in our Upper Peninsula in a rural area. This is a mass timber building. It is the first building in Michigan to be a full mass timber structure, not a hybrid structure. And it's the first to use Michigan wood in the mass timber. And I'll talk about how that happened in a little bit too. And then super important, back in, I forget which fiscal year it was, but in before 2020, the state legislature programmed $30 million to build the Michigan State University STEM teaching and learning facility. This is a new state-of-the-art classroom and laboratory building that's a hub for freshmen and sophomores who are in STEM curriculum and STEM majors, right? A super important spot on our campus, but it's also made of mass timber. And this was only the second building in our state to use cross-laminated timber. And the legislature made this investment in large part because the building is going to use mass timber. So those are some key ways the state has been investing already in mass timber. And so here's kind of some things that Mass Timber at MSU and some of our partners have been doing to really foster a mass timber ecosystem in Michigan. And some of them are going to sound familiar, some of them are going to sound a little bit different, and they all have kind of a regional flavor. So the first thing we do is we leverage that beautiful building on our campus as a learning laboratory. We've given tours to more than 3,000 people in the Michigan mass timber ecosystem who are mostly folks involved in the AEC industry, who are approaching their early mass timber projects. They get to come in, they get to interact with the mass timber, look at the connections, see how it all works, and hear from us as well as from our project team how we got past barriers. And then we keep in touch with those folks. We connect them to people like folks at Woodworks for additional resources and really build that relationship. And it's been very powerful. From these activities, we've learned that people want more. Somebody said, we need a Michigan mass timber community of practice. So we said, we'll make that. So we, in collaboration with Woodworks, with the American Wood Council, and with funding from the U.S. Forest Service, this year we launched a quarterly virtual mass timber community of practice for anybody in Michigan who's engaged in either making mass timber buildings, thinking about manufacturing mass timber in our state, or working in some other way to advance mass timber. They can ask questions of the folks staffing the meeting, but more importantly, they learn from each other. We're creating a peer learning environment. And we've had 50 to 80 people log on for these meetings. We've had 3 so far. Another way we bring people together is by hosting events or taking people outside of the state to events. So this year will be the 3rd annual Michigan Mass Timber Update. This is an event we host in December, where about 150 to 200 people from the Michigan mass timber ecosystem come together to celebrate all the things that are happening with mass timber this year, and to really be inspired and encouraged to reinvest their time, their energy, their money, their staffs, their ingenuity in moving forward mass timber from where they sit, which sector they sit in. This has been an outstanding way to get people inspired moving from one year to another. And the next one is December 10th, so coming right up.
And then we also take a group of Michigan folks to the International Mass Timber Conference each year. If you haven't been, I suggest going. It's wonderful. 3,000 people show up. 3,500 people, I think, this year will show up from across the US and across the world. And this is a great way to take, our Michigan folks into a new environment where they have exposure to a lot of new information. They get to be closely interacting with each other, and they come back with real partnerships that are leading to projects getting built on the ground and new product development. So this has been also just a really priceless kind of thing to do. And then finally, research and teaching, right? We're a university, we do those things as well. We have a research portfolio that consists of a supply chain analysis and demand survey to help prospective mass timber producers understand what's their feedstock going to be if they locate in Michigan, who's going to make their product, how much of it should they make, and what kind, what's the workforce context. So those results are going to start rolling out, like next week. So we're really excited about that, really starting to put that information in the hands of people who need it. Another thing that we're doing is we're addressing kind of this education gap in the mass timber space, and this goes far beyond Michigan. We have a $650,000 grant from the National Science Foundation that speaks to the need for architecture classes, engineering classes, construction management, and carpentry classes to have access to course modules to plug into their existing courses so that students in community colleges and universities can come out of those programs with degrees understanding something about mass timber. And we're working in close partnership with AEC industry professionals to develop these classes so that what's in the modules speaks directly to the industry's most pressing needs and desires for early career employees. And another thing I just want to mention that we're doing too, and it goes outside of Michigan as well, but one of our researchers, her name is Dr. Mojdan Nejad, she's developing lignin-based adhesives and coatings for application in mass timber products, lignin being a waste material of forest product industry and agriculture. These adhesives and coatings will be biodegradable, more sustainable in testing. They're showing stronger adhesion than the existing adhesives, and they're going to be about 5 times less expensive to apply in manufacturing, which could really help bring down the cost of mass timber products. So you can see that there's a variety of different ways that we're really focusing on building a mass timber ecosystem. So what's on the horizon for us? A lot, but importantly, you should know there are 50 mass timber buildings completed in Michigan or in our project pipeline. These are in various stages of development. Some of them won't happen, most of them hopefully will, and what we're really trying to do with our work is make sure that every building that wants to be a mass timber building in Michigan gets to be a mass timber building. We don't want to see it value engineered out when it doesn't have to be. We really want to attract mass timber production to our state, whether that is making panels and columns and beams, or whether it's engaging in the value-added fabrication and engineering stage of the value chain. We don't know yet what that looks like, but we want it to happen. And there's a few key things that are taking place to support this. First is the supply chain analysis and demand survey that I mentioned. Importantly, though, the state, with its Department of Natural Resources building that I showed you before, has done something really important and pushed the envelope. They have taken Michigan red pine and made sure to have that tested and certified in a cross-laminated timber panel product and installed in their building. The panels were made in Washington State by Boggin Timbers because we don't have a manufacturer in Michigan yet. But what that has done is proven that we can make CLT, cross-laminated timber, with Michigan wood, and hopefully a prospective manufacturer will see that and see that as like a suitable way of de-risking that activity. And then finally, Michigan Tech University, which is one of our counterparts in Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, is developing and testing hardwood mass timber products. Michigan has a lot of trees, but our forest mix is 30% softwood and 70% hardwood. We don't have certified hardwood mass timber products yet in the United States, but I sure would like to see Michigan getting there first. And then policy opportunities. I'm really excited about policy. I think we gotta have supportive policies to advance mass timber right now. We've had them for solar, we've had them for EVs, we've had them for energy efficiency measures. It's time for mass timber to have them. And what we're working on in Michigan, right, we gotta get our building codes updated to the most up-to-date version as it relates to mass timber. That's almost done. We're working on a local zoning ordinance that could be a model if it passes in the city of East Lansing that allows developers who use mass timber to earn points for doing that. and then to spend those points on activities that developers like building more stories in a height restricted zone, or building their large building on a smaller lot. So things that make their projects pencil better. We want to see some grants in Michigan to facilitate adoption. We're working on something right now to try to roll that out, hopefully this year. So can't yet quite say much about that, but keep your fingers crossed. And what we're really hoping is that the investments that have been made so far, including that new $1 million of investment that the state made this year, is something that we can leverage for increased investment by the state. We're going to prove that we can spend it well and that the need is there. And then also leverage that investment for federal funds, for grant funds, for other types of funding to really continue to boost mass timber momentum in our state. And then moving beyond Michigan, right? You know, my job is to really talk about mass timber for Michigan, but I'm also thinking regionally, right? We know that kind of an ecosystem is not confined by the shapes of our borders, right? Not by the mitten and the bunny or other states' shapes. We are thinking regionally. So with Bedrock, which is a real estate developer based in Detroit and Cleveland, with funding from the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Program, Mass Timber at MSU, we're collaborating to put together what we're calling the Great Lakes Mass Timber Collaborative. And we're hosting a convening in October, comprising mass timber engaged folks from 7 Great Lakes states. There they are. And we're going to talk about, based on the strengths and interests in your state, based on the barriers and opportunities you see, what does a strategic roadmap to a Great Lakes regional mass timber ecosystem look like? We're going to try to put that down on paper and start thinking about how do we take action to move that forward, because we're seeing so much success in the Pacific Northwest. We're seeing success. We see the opportunity for us to kind of be the next regional leader in mass timber in the United States. So wish us luck. That's where we're trying to go. And this is how you contact me. But lots of momentum in the Great Lakes region, and just so happy to share that with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Kathy Pfeifenberger. I manage the development, construction, architecture teams at Jamestown. For those of you who haven't heard of Jamestown, it's a integrated real estate development company. So we we oversee and manage real estate as well as develop. If you don't know the name, you probably know some of the projects. So Chelsea Market in New York is our development industry city in Brooklyn, 7 million square feet of fully renovated warehouses. Constantine Market in Atlanta, which was also an old brick building, Yardello Square in San Francisco. So what you probably noticed in common with all of those is renovation of pretty old historic buildings that were abandoned, deserted, and run down when we acquired them, and then we converted them and turned them into mixed-use projects. So the question for us is, as we do ground-up buildings on our assets and properties around the country, how do we make it as interesting as old brick buildings that have lots of soul and character and everybody wants to be in? So mass timber is really a great option for us. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is 619 Ponce. So 619 Ponce is our first mass timber CLT, and I will say it's hybrid because our core was concrete and steel. Building in Atlanta. And like everybody else, and I think what we've heard here today, there's clearly a lot of interest in building mass timber and has been for years. I spoke at a panel at AAA 2030 about 2 years ago in LA. I would say there are 100+ architects in the room. And I got the same question from every one of them, which is, how did you get your building built? Because everyone was working on designing a mass timber building and said by the time we got done with the VE, there was no mass timber left. So, you know, how did we get there? And I said, it's not easy. Like, it's early days, right? Everybody's interested, everybody's designing, everybody wants to get there, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the why and the how of how we got here. So why mass timber for us? I think sustainability, everybody here probably understands and knows that like it's a great carbon solution. And also we are working on doing operational net carbon zero buildings as well. I think the 2 things that we don't focus on as much is probably the impact to the neighborhood. So for our site, we had two buildings going up at the same time, one 21-story concrete steel tower adjacent to our mass timber building. It was a great visual because concrete steel, you know, you block down all the streets, and in the morning you see 18 concrete trucks, cement trucks lining up on the street, coming in, pouring, going. And then you look at the mass timber site, and one truck pulls in. Take off the CLT panels, build the building, there are 6 people on the site, it leaves. So the impact to the community and the neighborhood and everything around it, as well as the dust and the pollution, it's actually also a huge benefit from mass timber. And I think the biggest one is really the biophilic. I can remember us looking at mass timber, probably 10 years back, and the initial reaction is real estate is just unfortunately driven by a broker community. Oh, everybody wants a column-free building or an office that has 30-foot column bays, and these mass timbers have, timber columns all over the place. Well, the beauty of timber columns all over the place is when anybody walks in the building, y'all want to go hug the column. So it's a much better solution than what we have, but it really took some time for people to see what it was, to understand what it is. So for our why, we have 2 different pieces. As a real estate company, we actually started a timber fund back in 2008. And so we invest and manage about 90,000 acres of timber forests in the US. And it's all focused on sustainability for the timber as well as the wildlife and water on our timber plants. And then we had, in addition to this, our development opportunity was at Pond City Market, which is in Atlanta. So the old historic part of the building used to be a Sears manufacturing facility. So Sears Tower, the bit of the tower actually has a view protection in the code. So we had 3 options for our site. There's a tall building in the back, actually is a hotel, which just finished yesterday. 619 Ponce is our mass timber, and then there was another residential building we put on top of the parking deck on the Beltline. So all 3 of them, this was like 5 years ago, we looked at doing mass timber for all 3 of them. So the residential building on top of the parking deck is on the Beltline, which is the great greenway in sort of like the High Line here. It's a great greenway in Atlanta that everybody now rides, walks, and bikes to the office. It was so close to the Beltline and not adjacent to any access that fire department, we couldn't do mass timber because you just couldn't get to it. The 20-story tower was too tall at that time, so we couldn't do timber. 619, because of the view corridor, was perfect. So it was restricted anyway, so it was 100,000 square feet. And we decided this is like the perfect opportunity to do mass timber. So the existing asset is about 1.2 million square feet.